Okay, we're continuing learning about Andrew Jackson and his kind of radical presidency. And we're going to talk about the nullification crisis. The next few things we discuss are going to be things that Andrew Jackson encounters where he makes kind of a radical decision as the President of the United States. So remember that Southerners were really upset about the Tariff of 1828. Can you remember what they referred to it as? Okay, they called it the Tariff of Abominations. And they do not like tariffs at all. Well, in 1832, Congress will pass another high tariff. So now the South has, well, it's not just the South, but the whole country has two tariffs, two separate taxes on imported goods at work. And so they're very upset by this in the South particularly. South Carolina adopted the Ordinance of Nullification. And it's important to review what nullification is. Nullification would be when a state attempted to void, meaning disregard and not follow, a federal or national law. Okay, so it's when they're trying to basically ignore a national law. Well, within the Ordinance of Nullification, South Carolina nullified the tariffs of 1828, which was the Tariff of Abominations, and then now they're also nullifying the Tariff of 1832. So they are nullifying both of these tariffs in the Nullification Ordinance, or the Ordinance of Nullification. Within the ordinance, South Carolina also threatened to secede from the government and from the Union if the national government tried to force the collection of those import taxes. Okay, so they threatened to secede from the Union if the federal government tried to force the collection of taxes that would come from the tariffs. And what was kind of interesting was that John Calhoun supported this idea. John C. Calhoun, who was the vice president at the time, supported South Carolina's desire to secede from the Union if they were forced to pay these tariffs. And that's because John Calhoun doesn't like the idea of tariffs to begin with. But he's the vice president of the United States. I don't know what's up with these vice presidents lately. We got Aaron Burr shooting people. Now we have John C. Calhoun being okay with states seceding from the Union. So there's something fishy happening. But Andrew Jackson, who was the president, he did not like the idea of nullification or secession. Granted, Jackson wasn't very fond of tariffs either, but he did not like being threatened as the president. You know, he didn't like feeling his states had the right to void his laws or any law of the federal government. And he definitely didn't like the idea of secession. So he is starting to feel really kind of anxious about the situation, and there's a lot of tension between him and his vice president, John C. Calhoun. Well, in 1833, Jackson persuaded Congress to pass the Force Act, or the Force Bill. So in 1833, Jackson persuades Congress to pass the Force Bill. This gave the president the authority to use military force against any state that would not obey a national law. Okay, it gave the president the authority to use military force against any state that would not obey a national law. So there's a lot of tension between the states and the central government right now, particularly South Carolina and the central government. And so we need a solution, or more importantly, we need a compromise, okay? And now the Ghostbusters theme song should be playing through your head when you need a compromise, who you gonna call? And we know our great compromiser is Henry Clay. So of course now you're saying Henry Clay in the place of Ghostbusters. Anyway, that's kind of off topic, but it was funny in my other classes. Okay, so Henry Clay is the great compromiser, and he actually does propose a solution to this crisis. He passes what is called he proposes what is called the Tariff Act, which would provide for the gradual reduction of tariffs. And this makes both South Carolina happy. So South Carolina withdrew their nullification. And it also makes Jackson happy because it proved that a state could not nullify a federal law against, his will as president. So he was happy as well. Okay, we're now going to go to the next crisis called the Bank War. And if you can see all these pictures on your screen, I'll explain who is who and what names I need you to know and things like that. Take a moment. The man in the middle, we've decided he looks like a character from Harry Potter, but I can't decide which one. But he definitely looks like he's been on Harry Potter. Okay. The Second National Bank, well, if you remember, the bank was already given a second charter in 1816. So that charter would be up for renewal in 1836. And we also know that since Jackson was against the American system, he does not like the National Bank. And that renewal date is coming up pretty quickly. It's like 1832 right now. So we got a few years left and this bank will be up for renewal. Well, supporters of the bank, including Henry Clay, convinced the president of the National Bank, who was Nicholas Biddle, his name is on the screen, Nicholas Biddle, to ask for an early renewal of the bank charter in 1832. Jackson vetoed that idea right away, so it doesn't happen. Now it's Jackson who doesn't want to wait until 1836 to see the bank die. So he creates a plan to kind of get rid of the bank early. In effort to destroy the bank, Jackson told Roger Taney, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, to withdraw all federal money from the bank and deposit it into state banks that were called pet banks. And that's just banks that supported Andrew Jackson. Now, it wasn't only federal government money in the bank, because the bank had other personal investors, but Andrew Jackson was hoping removing this money would cause the bank to collapse. It did not cause it to collapse, but 4 years later, when the bank charter was expired and it was up for renewal, it was not renewed. So the bank charter would not be renewed and the National Bank is gone. So Andrew Jackson did kind of successfully see the end of the National Bank. Now at this point, Congress is not happy at all with Andrew Jackson because they're thinking that he's taking his power a little too far. I mean, he is kind of holding up to his promise that he did not like the American system, so he was going to do what he could to stop it, but at the same time, he's acting very radically. Okay. Moving on to Indian removal. Another issue Jackson found himself dealing with was Native American removal. Americans in western states wanted Native American Indians moved west of the Mississippi. Remember, they're settling western states, but their western states aren't very west yet. We're still moving west from the eastern coast, but we're still settling states like Illinois and Missouri and Arkansas. So they want to push the natives off of that land and west across the Mississippi River. Jackson was a bit of a racist, and he felt that natives were inferior, meaning less than and under white Americans. So he was in favor of the removal. And in 1830, he passed the Indian Removal Act. And the Removal Act provided the federal government with land and funding to move natives to present-day Oklahoma and Kansas. Now, some groups would move willingly, others would try to refuse, and military force was used to force them off. But there was one group of Cherokee Indians who refused to leave. And they fought back using the justice system. And this case was actually brought all the way to the Supreme Court in the case of Worcester versus Georgia. Now, the Supreme Court, with John Marshall as their Chief Justice, actually sided with the Indians, saying they did not have to be removed if they chose to stay. So he ordered the American government to leave them alone. Andrew Jackson's immediate response to this was, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." And I have that quote on the screen. I hope you can see it. I want you to think about what that quote means. What is the significance of Jackson's response to the Chief Justice? John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. The thing is that the Supreme Court can't enforce their own decisions. The president's the enforcer. And since he does not agree with the Supreme Court's decision, Andrew Jackson decides to ignore it and force the Cherokee off their land anyway. So he does move the Cherokee west to Oklahoma. And they walked what has become known as the Trail of Tears. So that's their walking west to Oklahoma. Nearly 25% of natives died along this trail. So what's the impact of Jackson? Well, he destroyed the American system. And by that I don't mean he destroyed America, but he destroyed the bank, and he lowered tariffs. He didn't really provide much into infrastructure, so he did succeed in not supporting the American system. He expanded the power of the president. I mean, he was a very powerful president, and definitely the most active and most powerful president up until his time. So he was more powerful than the six that came before him. And others after him will take after his lead. We also have the introduction of a new political party system. I told you that Andrew Jackson supporters referred to themselves as Democrats, while the alternative side, or the opposers of that side, are now known as Whigs. So the new political party system we have to replace what was before all Democratic Republicans, we have the Democrats and the Whigs, W-H-I-G-S. And the Whigs began as a group that did not approve of Andrew Jackson because they thought he was too powerful. That is all the notes. You should take a second to Google King Andrew the First political cartoon, because it has a good, it does a good job of kind of mocking Andrew Jackson's radical terms as president. Okay? Alright, listen to this again if you need to, and I will see y'all tomorrow. Oh, and make sure you write down questions if you have them.